Hello friends, you're with a Lonesome Gamer, and today I'm going to play 1869 USA West by Alan R. Moon. This is a print and play copy, but I think it is also published by Marflow Games. Now the designer is particularly known for Ticket to Ride, which I find always interesting to see some of the really successful designers like him or Tom Lehman, for example. It's interesting if you see that they also did 18xx games. What? That's this guy? Yeah, it is. Now this is definitely not a very popular title, and it's not to be confused with 18 West, which will be now published by All Aboard Games. This follows very much the 1829 branch, which is in general, I guess, less popular than the games that follow more the 1830 branch. But anyways, I think it's interesting to give it a shot. Okay, so this game is really big. I mean, if you look at the map for 18xx standards, this is definitely a huge map. There are bigger ones out there, there is no question, but this is definitely in my top 10. Shows, well, obviously the western part of the US, but not only that, it also shows a southern part here of Canada. Yeah, this is the border here. And just for your orientation, we have here Chicago, Montreal, and down here it's New Orleans. And it goes, well, right to the west coast. There's a lot of terrain here, the Rocky Mountains obviously, and many of it is really expensive. It goes up to 170, 180 here even, a lot of 160s, 150s. So yeah, it's a very expensive terrain here. But obviously not so much here. In the western part you have the Mississippi with 80 and 70, and that's pretty much it here. In the eastern part, I mean. So the cities where the money is basically Chicago. We have Montreal here, and let me see, I think now this is Montreal, that goes up to 70, Chicago is 80, and New Orleans is 60. These are pretty much the biggest cities on the map here at the end of the game. Okay, but the map is not the only thing here that is big. We have a ton of companies here. Let me see, it's 6, 8, 13 companies, and there is an optional one, the Illinois Central, but I'm not going to play with that one. This game can hold up to 8 players. I'm playing with 5, so I guess it makes sense to take the Illinois Central if you play with 7, 8, maybe 6, but I think for 5 players there's a sufficient number of companies here. What's interesting, and that is quite typical for the 1829 branch, you have these different groups of companies, or they come out in a kind of a predetermined order, and you have these little cards here that tell you when the next tier will be available. Sometimes it's when companies float of the previous tier, sometimes it has to be completely sold out. Of course, we also have a ton of tokens here. The bank is also huge, it's 36,000. There is no bankruptcy in the game, so that game will go until the bank here is empty. That's the only ending condition. And it is a long game. That's what I can tell you here. So another thing is the tiles. I think there is no other game with only a single gauge that has that many different tiles. It's totally crazy, and it also breaks with a rule that basically if you enter a tile or a hex from a specific site, even if you upgrade it to the maximum and it is not a city, you can only leave the hex on a maximum of 2 different options, right? So this, for example, here, you enter here and you can leave here or you can leave here, right? And that is basically here, and it's the same here, and yeah, it works pretty much for, this is the best you can get. And that is, from what I understand, it's basically in every game that I know. Of course, the cities work different. But here you got really crazy stuff going on. You got something like, let me see, for example, this. Now this is a totally unique tile. I've never seen something like that, where you have a choice between 3 paths. And I mean, look at that. It's even hard to figure out how this works, you know. But if you enter from here, this is kind of an extra thing, you know. This is a common brown tile, I guess, but this thing is added. So there's a lot of crazy shit going on here, and also that is pretty uncommon, and this one, and also these, you know. I mean, that is all so crazy here. So lots of weird tiles are around here. Another interesting aspect, the dots. You got your standard dots here, and you can upgrade them. I mean, this is not too uncommon, upgrading dots, but this basically works like cities. So you have a dot in the center, you enter the hex, have to hit the dot, and from there you can then choose where to go. They go a different way here. You got something like this or this, right? And I mean, if you look at that, you know, this changes. So basically, it remains kind of plain track in a way. I mean, you can upgrade this to your standard plain track tiles, and only one track will then be blocked by the dot. And that gives you some interesting options. So for example, if you have a dot and you want to go from there to from this end to this end, and you don't want to hit that dot, you can simply upgrade it, for example, into something like this. And now you have a free route. So that is, yeah, some unique stuff going on here with the tiles. So I already did the auction of the privates, and that looks pretty much like 1830. The only difference is that when everybody passes, the privates pay out, and then the face value of the unsold privates is reduced by 10. So, but that didn't happen here. So let's take a closer look. What's important, you cannot sell your privates to the company in this game. That is not possible. Most of them will close, I think, when the 6th train is purchased, and then they no longer take up a space in your certificate limit, but at the end they still count their value. Okay, so the guy over here, the first player, has the government contract. It says place 1 token in any station across the Canadian or US border for free, or place 2 tiles on 1 turn. Now what's interesting about that, of course placing 2 tiles is kind of cool, but you can basically just place a token. I think you don't have to be connected there. I'm going to check that, but I'm pretty sure about that. And usually if you want to place a token across the border, you have to pay $100 in addition to the standard to the normal price. So that's a lot of money you can save here. And we have, I think we have 2 Canadian companies. So if they want to place a token in the US, they have to pay the additional 100, and all the US companies obviously have to pay the money if they want to place a token in Canada. So that can be clearly a helpful ability. Then we have here the Butterfield Overland Mail, which doesn't have a special ability. Just pays out a revenue of 5. And we have the San Francisco New Orleans Steamship Company. I guess that's New Orleans, the NO. I'm not totally sure, but I think so. And that gives the owner the presidency of the Southern Pacific. The presidency is worth, in that specific presidency, is only a 10% share. And like many other games of the 29 branch, the par value is already predetermined here. So every company has a predetermined par value. You cannot choose like in 1830 or so. Oh, and that thing did cost 90, and the players start with 700. With $700, and I'm gonna play a 5-player game. I don't know if I mentioned that. I remember I did. So yeah, we start with 700, and I'm not totally sure. He might have spent a little more to bid on that, but in general, this is about 90. This thing is 20 and 280 for the company with the share. This guy has the $50 company, the Daily Overland Mail, pays a revenue of 10, but does not have any further special ability. But he also has, for $140, the Mississippi Engineering. So it says bridge 1 Mississippi hacks at no cost or place 2 tiles on 1 turn. Okay. Here, this guy, player 4, he has the Los Angeles, New York Steamship Company. Well, I guess that should mean receive the president's share of the Central Pacific, holding closed when the Central Pacific Railroad runs trains. And until then, it pays a revenue of 30. Now, the Central Pacific Railroad is worth, the presidency is a 20% share, and it's worth $220. And it can actually start in the first tier, and that is different to the Southern Pacific. The Southern Pacific is here in the second tier, and that will be available when the initial offer of Group 1 is sold out. So when all these companies are sold out, the upper 3, then players can start to buy the Southern Pacific. However, it is possible, it is allowed, and we get a little more into detail about that. the player could sell the presidency into the bank pool, and he could do that technically. I don't know if you can do it in the first stock round. I'm not sure if you're allowed to sell shares in the first stock round. I gotta check that. I don't think so. But he doesn't have to wait until this thing floats or something. So there is this option to sell this presidency if this thing simply does not operate. Okay. And he has, for $200, the Rocky Mountain Explosives, blow one mountain hex free, or place 2 tiles on 1 turn. So there are a couple of variants that you can use in the game. I already mentioned the additional Illinois Central that I didn't use. The game also gives you the option to remove 1 or 2 of the 5 trains. And they suggest definitely to do that if you play with 6 or more players. But you can also do it with less. And I chose to remove 1 train because, you know, it speeds up the game a little bit. And there is one. I'm not playing with the additional company, so I think removing 1 train might be a good idea. In addition to that, I'm going to use the mines variant, and that is a very special thing because it adds quite an element of luck to this game. That is, some people might not enjoy that at all. I haven't tried it yet, but I think it could be a neat idea for playing solitaire because it gives you a little less control, it adds some randomness to the game, and yeah, shakes things up a little bit. So basically, if you build, wait a minute, I've written that down. I think if you pay $150 or more for a mountain hex south of, God, I think it's this row here, Casper. Yeah, I think it's this row here. So if you pay south of that row $150 or more, in addition to placing the tile, you are allowed to draw from this stack of mountain cards here. And there are 12 coal mines, and they will add to the revenue. It's a one-time bonus, but it can be huge. I think there is one card which gives you $400. But there are also cards which give you 50 or $150 and something. So there is a big difference, and that adds a lot of luck. I'm not sure if I would like to play that way, as I said, with other players, but I think solo it can be fun. Okay, so now this guy starts here, over there, and well, like in 1830, you need 60% to float a company. Okay, so there are now these companies available: the Central Pacific, the Union Pacific, and the Canadian. And you can see that it's an interesting thing here, because, gosh, just a second. The Central Pacific shares, there are 2 more 20% shares, and the rest are 10% shares. And usually the 20% shares are an advantage because there is obviously a share limit or a certificate limit here. Yeah, it's not a share limit, but a certificate limit. So you get a big advantage if you manage to get the double shares. And there are some some shares or some companies in the game that have even higher denominations or percentages. For example, the presidency here of the Canadian Pacific is 30%. And there are later in the game, there are 40% shares. And if you manage to get those, that gives you a huge advantage because you simply have more income usually if you have more shares, and the share appreciation also, well, you get obviously more out of it. And in this game, as the president, there is no liability. You don't have to buy a train if you don't want to. So that means there is no risk that a company can get dumped on you. And you can also sell the presidency under specific circumstances. You can only sell the presidency if no other player owns a share. But still, usually there is a way that you can simply get rid of your trouble. And it's not like in some other games when a company does not have a train, for example, the share is only half the value. That's not the case. You get your full money if you sell a share, no matter what. Of course, no longer this value is then applicable, but the actual market value. So yeah, there is definitely a reason to go for these double or triple shares here. Still, there is now this decision. There are two presidencies available, and there is a share 20% of the Central Pacific. The problem is I cannot float a company on my own. So do I want to risk it? Do I want to buy one of the other presidencies? I mean, being a president is kind of cool. You got a lot of control. Do I want to buy another presidency and risk that someone else, or that I cannot float my company because I would need someone to help me with it? I mean, the thing is, if I buy this one here, there is one other share for 220, another 20% share, which is definitely an interesting alternative for other players to buy. So I kind of can imagine that there will be someone who helped me float this if I don't buy the second share, if I only buy the first one. This one here is tricky though. The presidency is even better. It's a 30% presidency, so getting that would be great. But all the other remaining shares are just 10% shares. So I have my doubts that someone will help me floating that one. Therefore, I think I'm either going to try to get the presidency here, or I'm going to buy the Central Pacific share. So I guess I'm going to roll a die here, and the presidency is, in my opinion, an advantage. So I'm going to roll a 1, 2, 5 here. And okay, I'm going to go for the presidency of the Union Pacific. And by the way, I checked the rules, and the rules actually, like in 1830, forbid to sell shares in the first stock round. Otherwise, I could simply take the risk, buy that thing, and if nobody's willing to help me float it, I could immediately sell the presidency again. But that is not possible here. So I'm going to buy the presidency here for $220. And I hope that someone else buys that second share here of the Union Pacific. And by the way, there is no predetermined order here in the shares. So technically this is not the second share. If someone else wants to buy a 10% share, he's free to do so. you can buy any share that's sitting there. The first share has to be the presidency, but after that, you can buy any certificate that is here on the market or in the IPO. So I think this guy, it's a little tricky because this is the starting point of the Central Pacific. So if we move along here, for example, it will take a couple of turns till we actually make money. And so that kind of sucks. And the Union Pacific will make money earlier. And so will the Canadian. Over here, you know, they can make a connection here, for example. They can make money immediately. So if you think about that, maybe it's actually a better idea to go for shares of these two companies instead of buying a share of the Central Pacific. So, wow, might think about that too. There's another thing that you have to take into account, though. If the Central Pacific and the Union Pacific, if they connect, and I think there is no special point where they have to do that. Let me see. Yeah, there just has to be a route between Omaha and Sacramento. So if these two connect, then both companies get $300. And they can, and the president decides that, they can either keep that or they can pay it out to the shareholders, and they can also partly pay it out, whatever they want to do. So if they pay it out, it's a big one-time boost, right? I mean, $300 is a lot of money. It will take 3 turns till this can be done, at least 3 turns, but then it's a nice boost. So there are a lot of questions here. Again, this company runs for $50 in the first turn. This company can run for $40 in the second turn. I mean, they need a train, obviously, so this will also be the second turn, right? So this company can go for $40 in the second turn, this company for $50, and here will take a little longer. It will take one more turn until they run for $40. So the question is now, do I want to try to get these 20% shares? Do I invest in 10% shares here? Do I trust that somebody will do so because this gives more money? And do I take the risk of buying a 30% presidency here? There's a lot of things to consider. Maybe I will do some negotiations here. There's another issue here. This guy, for example, if he buys the presidency of the Canadian Pacific for $330, there's a chance that somebody else who has $440, he could steal the company from him, and then he gets that cool, nice little share on that certificate, that 30% presidency, and I helped him to float it. And this guy, for example, he has enough money to do that. Of course, it is also possible that other people will buy the 10% shares so that he doesn't get 4 of them. There's a lot to consider here, and it's really, really hard. It is really a lot to think about. I guess I'm going to roll a die. I think the Central Pacific isn't that great at that moment, to be honest. because, as I said, at the beginning it won't make any money at all. Of course, the $300, but they will be there only in the third operating round. So I think I'm going to either go for the Union Pacific share, or I'm going to go for the presidency here. And because I'm not I don't want to take risk. I've got my personality roles here. I think on a 1 to 3, yeah, I make it simply 50-50%. So on a 1 to 3, I'm going to buy Union Pacific share. And no, I'm actually going to go for the Canadian Pacific, hoping that other players will help me, but on the other hand, that nobody will buy enough to steal it from me. It wouldn't be a disaster, but it would be kind of a shame, you know, because it's a 30% certificate, and that is obviously pretty awesome. Okay, great. So next player here is in a similar position. Or, well, he has now the choice. Do he want to buy 10% of the Canadian, which gives more money, or do I want to try to get a 20% share of the Union Pacific? Again, interesting choice here. I think the Union Pacific share might be worth more, but that is just my personal idea. Again, I'm going to roll here. I think on a 1 to, yeah, I think again on a 1 to 3, I'm going to go with that choice here. So yeah, this time he decides to buy a Canadian simply because it makes more money right now. And I'm going to go through the table and do the operating, the stock round now. And most of it off camera, I guess. Now player 4 is sitting on this presidency of the Central Pacific. And he's got now the problem, you know. Does he want to buy another share for 220? The problem is he will not be able to actually start it on his own, at least not on his own. And the question is, will someone else help him? Do people think, hey, that 20% share is valuable enough for me that I'm willing to basically pass on the revenue of one operating round? Hard to tell. Now there's a really weird situation here. If you think this through, you know, it gets more and more complicated. Technically, the Central Pacific is a pretty valuable company because of this connection with the Union Pacific. You get $30 per share if the president pays out. On the other hand, the thing is, of course, this guy has to be willing, the president of the Union Pacific, first of all, has to be willing to cooperate. And that means he kind of has to pass on the run in the first OR, or in the second OR. He also has to choose to take that fast route. I mean, of course, he could go like this, run the train, and then like this, but then it will take a much longer, I think at least one turn longer, till we get that connection done. So that will hurt the Central Pacific a little more. So he has to make that negotiation with the owner of the Union Pacific. Hey, I mean, what about it? Do we want to meet here in the fastest possible way? And that guy might be interested in doing that. Why not? He says, okay, I get $30 per share. One stock round earlier, and I kind of lose something like $4 per share for one stock round. So that is okay for me, basically. That's a good deal. However, problem with that is, even if I'm willing to cooperate here, still both companies somehow must get floated. And that is not so easy. They cannot do it alone, right? Someone has to help them. And maybe the people are not exactly willing to do that because it's a very, very interesting decision here. Okay, now here's the thing. I think I'm going to simply invest in the 20% share of the Central Pacific. The reason if I don't get this shit floated, I still can simply sell it down. I can simply sell the presidency into the pool in the next stock round and invest in something that will make money. So, I mean, the bad thing is that the cool double shares will be gone then. The chance now to buy a share of the Union Pacific will be gone, but I think I'm gonna try it anyways. So I'm gonna buy that share of the Central Pacific for 220, and I really hope that somebody will help me. Maybe other players are also eager to get the revenue that comes with the connection here, the 300 bucks. That's a lot of money. Okay, I mean, this guy here, I think, and that is another interesting aspect now. Oh gosh, this is really an interesting first stock round. I didn't really see that until now. I think he actually will invest in the Canadian Pacific. The funny thing is, if everybody else buys shares of the Union, the Central Pacific, then he can steal the Canadian from that player. So I think that's what I want to do. I'm going to buy the 110 share from this guy. Okay, now let's see what else is out there. Well, we got the Union Pacific again for 220 bucks. A second share here. And the question is now, do I want to buy that one? You know, I mean, this is another interesting aspect. I could say maybe I should buy a 10% share so that other people are still willing to invest in my company and get the 20% share. Because this is obviously more interesting. So I think actually, holy crap. It's hard to tell. It really is hard to tell. Yeah, I think I'm actually going to buy the 10% share. I'm going to need partners. And the 20% might be interesting for other players. So, yeah, I'm gonna invest 110 and still really hope that someone else will help me here. A lot of strange stuff going on in this stock round. Now this player already has no more money. He has to pass, so he gets the priority deal for now. Now, I could start the Canadian Pacific. I think the funny thing is, we might end up in a situation where only the Canadian Pacific will be actually operating. It's not impossible that this will happen, but we'll find out about that. I think I might want to go in that direction. I say, you know, guys, I'm not helping you with your 20%, and I'm also not helping you with your 20%. Instead, I'm going to buy another share of the Canadian Pacific and maybe you guys just lost a big gamble. So yeah, I think I'm gonna do that. So I'm gonna spend another 200 bucks, and I get back 90, and I get another share of the Canadian Pacific. And it seems like nobody really expected that, but it is I mean, before I now lose everything, I think I'm also going to buy a share of the Canadian. Yeah, I don't know. I cannot start the Central Pacific, so if I want to, I don't know, man. I might as well just pass at that point. Maybe I make enough money out of my steamship company in the next round that I can start something. Maybe I'm not even too eager to start that thing. I make 30 bucks from my company here as long as the Central Pacific does not operate, or as long as it does not run trains. So technically that's not so bad for me. Maybe I'm happy with that. A lot of things to consider here. So I guess I'm gonna pass. And that gives him priority. On the other hand, maybe I should buy a share of the... damn, I don't know. Maybe of the Canadian? Hard to tell. Before they're no longer available, it might be an idea to say, hey, we're going to invest in the Canadian. I don't know. So it turned out that my idea of stealing the presidency from him by buying 4 Canadian shares, that idea will probably not work. Simply because if the other players realize now that they cannot get the Central Pacific or the Union going, then they will also invest in Canadian Pacific shares, which means I will only be able to probably buy a maximum of 2 more shares, and then I'm sitting on something like 150 bucks. And I will not be able to do something with that money. I can buy a share, but there is no other company floated yet. So it's a very weird situation right now. I basically am forced to help another company to float if I don't want to end up with a ton of money left. So what I'm actually going to do now is I will actually buy that 20% share of the Union Pacific. Because, yeah, it's a good share. And, you know, I don't want to end up with tons of money that I cannot use. And of course, he is now pretty happy because this gives him now the option to buy the last share and float the company. He might consider buying a share of the Canadian, or maybe even of the Central. But the Central is tricky. But he could actually, I think he's going to buy another share of the Canadian Pacific. The reason is, it's going to make good money, and he will still be able to buy another share of the Union Pacific. He has the money to float the company. So right now, maybe investing in the Canadian is a good idea. Or maybe not. Hard to tell. I think I want to invest in the Canadian for now. For 110 bucks. It is tempting to invest in the Union more, trying to get as much out of it as possible because of this connection here, the 300 bucks. But if the Central Pacific will not float, that can take a while until that happens. Okay, so we're at the end of the stock round. We go into the first OR. And two companies have floated, the Canadian Pacific and the Union Pacific. Now let's take a closer look here, because this is also kind of interesting. You can see that the capital is obviously 10 times the share value. But it also says here bonus routes. Montreal to Seattle or Vancouver. So that is, if there is a connection between these two cities and they can run trains completely between these two cities. It doesn't have to be well, you don't need to do it with one train. You can, okay, let's say we have Seattle here. Let's say we have, I don't know, let's say we have a 3 train or something that goes 1, 2, 3. And then we have, I don't know, a 4 train which goes 1, 2, 3, and then to Montreal. That would be fine. That would be a connection. And there could be even a dot in here, an enemy dot or something, as long as there is a connected line. And that can be, as I said, more than one train. That means, as a bonus, during the revenue step, the company will get an additional $280. That is a lot of money. And they can decide if they want to add that to the revenue when they pay out to the shareholders, or if they want to keep the money in the treasury and only pay the rest of the revenue. They could also pay this partly, I think. So this simply gives you additional money, and you can decide to swallow it or pay out or whatever. This is a huge bonus. And nearly all the companies have that. These guys have a route from Omaha to San Francisco, which gives them 60, or a route from Omaha to Portland, and it has to go through either Salt Lake City or Ogden, and that gives them 110. Okay, so now we go into the operating round, and first, of course, the privates will pay out. So $15 over here. This guy gets $40. That's a lot of money. But yeah, that is a lot of money. This guy gets 30, which is also significant. $30 over here too, as long as the company does not operate. The Central Pacific, and 25 here. Okay, and now the Canadian starts, and well, my idea is now to kind of run here to Winnipeg, and then also run here to Winnipeg, and I can lay a dot here, and then I can run twice from Montreal to Winnipeg, and Montreal is a good location. And now it takes obviously a while to do all that, right? But still, I think it's a neat start. And the cool thing is now this dot here is kind of, I mean, it just helps me to make a little bit of money. But later, if it kind of pisses me off, I can simply upgrade this into one of these crazy tiles, and then I will no longer be limited. I can simply move then to Winnipeg with a 2 train in the end. So that is kind of sweet. We're gonna lay a tile here. And yeah, something I forgot. There are a couple of things special here about the trains, and also, first of all, the first step during an operating round is basically that a company may discard any number of trains. So if a company is at its train limit and it likes to buy a new train, in this game you have the option, you can, at the beginning of your operating round, discard a train which goes into the bank pool, and then you have room for for more trades. So that is, I think, a pretty unique feature. In addition, companies that have obsolete trains, if they didn't trigger the rusting events by themselves, so if another company bought the train which made a train of my company obsolete, then I have to discard the train of my company at the end of my next operating round. That means I basically get a free run, which is also pretty cool. So it's kind of interesting. At that point, technically, I don't have to buy a train. I'm not required to do so. It's not mandatory. Of course, I want to run next round. I can make 50 bucks here. So obviously, I'm going to buy a train, and it's going to be a 2 train for 90 bucks. Okay, great. And didn't pay out, so the share value drops. And now it's the Union Pacific. And they start here. And yeah, now they have to make that decision. Where do we go? Do we try to go as soon as possible this way here and make that connection with the Central Pacific? That's a tough call. I mean, the Central Pacific will be able... I'm not sure if I can actually... If it will be floated next turn, it's not that easy. Possibly not. And because I don't want to wait forever, I mean, I hold 40%. I think I might say, okay, we're going to go for Casper first before we try to make that connection. From then on, we can still work our way down. So, but yeah, as I said, I wanna get some revenue. I wanna make some money, and I don't want to wait until the Central Pacific gets floated here. Okay, this is pretty much all that happens. I also want to buy a train because I want to run next turn, so I'm going to buy my also 2 train, obviously, for 90 bucks. Okay, and that's it. That was the first OR, and because we are in yellow, there's only a single OR going on. So we go into the next stock round, and let's see if someone has the money to do something. I mean, for example, this guy. He could sell the share, the presidency of the Southern Pacific, and I got a feeling he wants to do so. Of course, he could hold it. He could say, yeah, you know, it's a presidency. It's kind of cool to have that. And at some point, and it's not going to be in the too far future, this thing will open up and then I control it. But let's be honest. That specific presidency is not terribly valuable. In other games, a presidency is awesome because, or is mostly awesome because you have control and you have a 20% share. Here, you don't have a 20% share. That presidency is only worth 10%. Control in this game, well, I mean, it's not that important because nobody can dump a company on you. So you know what? I guess I'm going to sell the Southern Pacific, the presidency. And right now, that basically there's nothing happened right now. I just sell it, and it's sitting there, and as soon as someone else buys a 10% share, it will be, or he can either buy the presidency right out of here, or if someone else buys a 10% share, he will have to exchange it for the presidency of the Southern Pacific. But right now, I just sell the thing, it sits there, and everything's fine. I get $101 out of it, and I'm going to throw in another $9 to buy that last share here of the Canadian Pacific. Because it's the company that makes the most money right now. Okay, great. So now these guys also have more than $100 sitting here. So I guess we're investing in the Union Pacific here, because they're also making money next turn. Okay, you know what? I think I'm going to sell a share of the Central Pacific here. And again, there is no restriction that you're not allowed to sell shares of companies that have not yet operated or something like that. I simply can sell that thing. And I wonder, we probably have to mark that, although they don't operate, but I will do it anyways. So that means that guy started here, and it is now, he sold 2 shares, and the value drops by 2. So I guess now that share is worth $93. Just have to make sure that I do not operate this thing. This is a little weird. And the Southern Pacific, that is really a little odd. I think I'm going to mark that too, because it was sold. So that means now that the share value of the Southern Pacific is also, that was sold first. So technically I think it should be on top. This is a little tricky. I think I did get this done right, because they kind of have that marker, although they don't really operate. I don't know if that's supposed to be like that, but the rules are a little fuzzy on that. So I'm going to do it like that. Now that guy here, he keeps the presidency of the Southern Pacific because there are not that many shares out there. And he knows that the Southern Pacific will be started pretty soon. So I think holding that presidency is fine. He buys a share of the Union Pacific, and he has the money to buy a second share of those guys. There's no money in here, so this guy passes. Also him, he also passes. So I'm going to buy a second share of the Union Pacific. Now I could actually buy a third share if I'm willing to sell my presidency. That is a tough call. I don't think I want to do that. I don't think it gives me a big advantage, so therefore, yeah, I'm not going to do that right now. I guess I prefer to keep the presidency here. It's a little bit hard to tell. It really is. I'm thinking about selling the presidency too. I wonder if there is a specific rule that forbids that. It's really hard. Maybe it's bound on the private company or something like that. I gotta check that. But actually I'm thinking about selling this thing too. It's just not that great. So it gives me $220. I think it is legal. I didn't find anything that forbids it. So yeah, that gives me another 220. Now right now, there is only this share available. I cannot buy, of course, another share of the Central Pacific after I sold a share of the Central Pacific, but I can buy that share here of the Union Pacific for $110. And I also think that the share value here of the Central Pacific drops by another 2 shares. I know it sounds a little crazy, but you know, if you follow the rules, nobody says, hey, this is not legal. So I will do that. Okay. If you have a better idea about that, just let me know. So this is it. This guy has priority. We're at the end of the stock round. And yeah, just let's do another OR. Okay, so the Canadian Pacific can run a train here for $50. So it's $5 per share. And this guy is sitting on, oh, I forgot the privates. I'm going to do that in a minute. This guy is sitting on 40%, so that means he gets 20. Over here we have 20%, so that's 10, 5, 10, and up there another 5. And by the way, the companies are sold out, so the share value would rise, but because it is already here at the very top, that won't happen, obviously. These guys here, the Union Pacific, laid a tile here in Casper, and they ran for 4, and obviously they paid out, and now they are good to go for this connection, because now I'm pretty sure that in the next stock round the Central Pacific will float. There's nothing more to buy out here except for these shares, and there are a couple of players who can at least afford a single share, maybe not a double share. It's kind of an interesting thing. What happens if now people buy 2 10% shares, but they cannot get the presidency? This is weird, to be honest, and I have no fucking clue how to handle that. What happens in that very specific situation? That, let's say now 2 people are buying each a 10% share, and then the company would be floated because there are 60% out of 60% out of this. What happens then? I have absolutely no clue. I don't know. Maybe selling the presidency wasn't legal. I have to check that. Maybe I will find out. Try to ask a question on Board Game Geek or something like this. But this is clearly odd. A company can go into receivership if they're 60% in the bank pool and there is no president there. No, actually that's not true. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe the company simply goes into receivership anyway if the presidency is in there. That is a possibility. Oh boy. But that would mean that the company cannot pay out and that basically everybody kind of loses money. That is so weird. That's a very strange situation. I don't really know how to handle that. I'm gonna have to check that out. I'm gonna think about that. Maybe it was not legal to actually sell the presidency, but I just don't know. It clearly states that it's possible to sell the presidency of the Southern Pacific. That is actually written in the rules, even though it has not floated yet. So I don't really see a reason why you should not be able to sell the presidency of the Central Pacific. A lot of weird stuff going on in this game. Maybe we'll find a solution, maybe not. If not, we have to make something up. Hope to see you in the next video or on lonesomegamer.com. Bye.